Welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Frank talk about sex and dating.
All right. Well, welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast, episode number 9. Today we have Danielle, who is a dating coach based in Sydney with a degree in psychology and years of experience studying human behavior. She also has a podcast herself called Love Undressed, and you can find her on Instagram and TikTok at _the love list. And then I also have Rowan, who is a self-professed, confused dater, but she's not sure what she wants. She likes to date, but not necessarily commit. So we will talk to Danielle. We'll talk about that whole idea. I guess there are lots of people in that boat. So go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the podcast. First of all, it's I love talking about this stuff. Obviously, that's why I talk about it all the time and why I do it for work. But yeah, I think dating itself is a little bit chaotic, especially at the moment. Countries have been going through periods of being stuck at home, and the only thing that you can do are online dates. And one thing that I talk about quite heavily with people that I coach is nowadays there's quite a lot of choice. So I see clients constantly going back and forward by saying, well, okay, I'm on 3 different apps, and my problem is why would I just pick one person when I can date 8 people and just see how each one goes? And from my experience, I think the paradox of choice is ruining dating a little bit. So the more options that we're being displayed with, the harder we find it to come to the ultimate conclusion as to who we should pick. And I'm seeing that a lot. A lot of people nowadays are dating because they enjoy the process of dating, but actually there's so much choice out there. When do you actually know whether or not you found the person that you want to stick with for the rest of your life, when, we've got all this, I suppose, scope to do whatever we want with our lives at the moment. Once the world kind of opens back up and is a bit more normal, we can travel where we want, we can live in whatever country we want, we can go wherever we want for work. And I do think that opens people up to so much choice that maybe sometimes we get a little bit, I suppose, overwhelmed, especially when it comes to dating. You can go back even, I'd say, 30 years or so, and your choices were a lot less. So, people tended to date people from within their local proximity, and that's great. It kind of rules down your options a little bit, but also I'm not sure I believe that people are going to find the love of their lives a mile from their house. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I've met my childhood sweetheart and I've known them since I was 12 and we grew up together. And I go, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. But how many times have you left your local area? And the odds are they haven't really traveled. They haven't experienced life. And they're going, no, I've met the love of my life. What are you talking about? This person is my soulmate. And I'm like, are they though? Are they? Are you sure? Because I don't know if I can really believe that you found your soulmate a mile away from your home when you've got this entire world to explore, all these people to meet, all these cultures to interact with, and your soulmate was literally 3 doors down from you. So yes, the world is big and there's a lot of things to explore, but also I think it's, it provides good and bad things for dating nowadays.
Yeah. And I'll ask Rowan real quick, just what does that resonate with you as far as would you say that's your essential issue too, is so many choices or just more fear of commitment?
I think it's really figuring out what it is that I want. So there are times, so admittedly, I'm American. I was born and raised in Michigan, but I'm half Lebanese and I'm a quarter Indian, quarter Pakistani. I have been engaged twice before and then also married and divorced. So I am not on a roll here. But there are times where I think, well, maybe now I want to find somebody who is within my culture. And by my culture, I typically mean Lebanese because that's the culture I probably most closely identify with outside of being American. So I think maybe I want to find somebody who's Lebanese American, regardless of religion. But then there are times where I think, well, maybe be fine dating anybody, but like I'd want them to be within my religion. But I was married before to a really great person who was neither of those things. And so I think it's constantly like me trying to figure out exactly what I would want. And I think about the longevity of the relationship too. And I think about, like, I don't want kids. So that kind of already puts me, like, narrows my dating pool, right? I'm not looking to have a family per se, raise children with somebody. So that kind of not limits my options, but a bit. Um, and so I would say that's probably my biggest issue is just figuring out precisely what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So Daniel, do you want to answer that question generally or whatever you want to take with it?
I think a lot of people, and whether or not this is your experience, you kind of, especially when you've had relationships that you've tried and maybe haven't worked so well, we tend to go, okay, well, I've learned certain things from that experience. And you could have been dating one type of person and you go, well, okay, that's fine. But for my next experience, I maybe want to try and veer away from that experience that I've just come away from. So obviously, I'm not sure what your previous relationships or marriages were like. And I don't know whether or not you feel comfortable discussing that on this episode of the podcast or not. But for me, what I always find interesting when I'm going back over people's previous relationships that they've had is understanding where they think those relationships maybe not necessarily went wrong, but just went off in different directions, because there's not always something that's like, well, okay, this is the catastrophic point where everything fell to a million pieces. Sometimes things just naturally don't fit. And when things end because of a natural, like, bad fit of a relationship, we want to try and find new dynamics. And to find new dynamics, we try new people. So have you dated within your culture before, or what were the kind of people like that you were married to?
Yeah, so I've dated before within my culture and religion, but then it kind of, he had one of them at the time was a little bit more religious than I was, and so was his family. Oddly enough, he is no longer like that. He's probably on the other side of the spectrum at this point. Um, and so it's just more like family issues than anything. And then with my marriage, my ex husband's an amazing person. And we had, I would say, oddly enough, like, we had a great marriage, but we were geographically separated for the majority of it because we're both in the military. Um, and then I think there are things with our personalities that were a little different. Like, I'm probably more outgoing and I like to joke around a lot. And he's like a great person, and we both like to laugh or find humor in a lot of the same things, but he perhaps isn't as outgoing. And then after we divorced, I met somebody who was more similar to me. And we connected on a lot of levels, but then he had some other issues, like a lot of insecurity. And then I found myself constantly comparing him to my ex husband because, for all intents and purposes, he's like a perfect husband. And so that obviously is not a very smart thing to do. You should not compare somebody that you're currently dating with people you have in the past. And so that I find myself now, oftentimes, if I were to talk to somebody, I find myself thinking, well, if they're not going to do at the very least, what my ex husband did, then why would I settle for you? I had somebody who was a great person who took care of me emotionally as well, not, just financially. He like actually was a very caring person. And although I didn't connect to him on this one level, why would I settle for that? And then I also will find myself thinking, you know, not every relationship is just going to have that hot, passionate love, for the entirety of it. And so, I had a great partnership, and maybe that is something that I should be happy with and commit to rather than looking for just excitement, because that doesn't tend to have longevity, but a true partnership does.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll agree with a lot of that. I think people try and find this if we're going to be honest, it's just like raw sexual chemistry that we want in relationships. Like that's what everyone tries to look for, especially when you're dating. You go, well, I'm going to go on dates, but if I don't have that initial spark with someone, and I've had that with someone before, then it must mean that this isn't the right person for me. And my problem with an initial spark that all of us look for, and I know this as someone who's, been in the dating world before and done this whole thing, you look for that. I want instant chemistry. I want to feel something straight away for this person that I'm sat next to or opposite or whatever it is. But chemistry is something that can be built on. And the more we obsess over something, especially in really initial dating phases, like most of us do, I think the more likely we are just to kind of walk away from something that has a lot of potential. So a spark can be built on. And that tends to be quite a controversial thing that I bring up to people when someone's like, no, you should get butterflies and you should feel this instant thing with someone. And actually, that's not necessarily true. Just because you go on maybe 1 date or 2 dates with someone and you don't initially feel that doesn't mean that it can't be felt later on. Like this is how sometimes people who have been friends who are the opposite sex end up falling in love or forming relationships, because you've built some sort of emotional bond. So that emotional relationship is there way before a physical one ever is. And because that emotional bond is there, it's built some sort of underlying sexual chemistry, so that all of a sudden one day you wake up and it like switches on and you go, oh, where did this come from? Because it's not something that you initially started looking at from like a dating or relationship point of view. It's just kind of grown as a relationship has developed platonically.
Yeah, I was going to say the show Love Island here in the US, I know they have it in other countries too, but there's a couple like that. They started out as just friends, and by the end they were they won the show because they had the most chemistry and the best overall chance at a relationship, it seemed. And I know a lot of people do write people off, like you're saying, without that spark. So it's good to know it can build. So it's a good reminder too for people, because I know lots of people, compare and contrast and end things sooner than they should. And the other end of it, they'll assess the relationship potential on date 1 and rule people out that way rather than just get to know people early on. Do you have any thoughts on that part of it, or either of those things?
Oh, completely. People do this all the time. And especially like people that I've coached in the past, all the time, people are going, yeah, we went on 1 day, like they'd done this one thing that was weird and now I'm not going to see them again. And I'm like, hold on a minute, because actually if you were in a relationship with this person, all these weird little quirks or little things that you're like, oh, I'm not sure about early on in the dating process, if you were in a relationship and you were in love with them, you would not bat an eyelid at. You wouldn't care, because these would be what makes this person who they are. But when we're dating someone really early on, those little, I'm going to call them quirks, are the things that we go, oh, I don't want that in a partner, so I'm just not going to see them anymore. But they're the things that we grow to love. So the more open-minded we are when we date someone, I know that a lot of us will go, okay, well, we should have what I call like our core values when we go into dating. These are the core things that you know make up you as a human being. So they're things that you don't want to compromise on. So they could be things like, that you're ambitious, so you need to be with someone who's driven and ambitious, or someone who puts their career first because you're very career focused, or you're family orientated, so you want someone else to be family orientated. They're the core values. They're the core foundations of a relationship. And ultimately, they're the things that if you guys don't have those things in common, along the lines, they are going to draw you apart, whether that's, different work locations. So you're going to be at opposite ends of the country for work for long periods of time. As you were saying, this has caused an issue previously, and things like that have to be brought up. And again, people have this tendency, from what I've seen, especially when you've started dating someone and maybe you found someone who you're dating for a few months and you're going, this person's got potential, we're going to see how it goes. And you kind of just slide through each phase of a relationship. So you slide from the initial few early dates into, okay, well, now we're exclusively seeing each other. Okay, now we're officially seeing each other. And now you don't make those active choices. You kind of just gradually slide from one to the other. And actually, the couples who sit down and have conversations about each phase of this relationship progressing they're the couples who are more likely to be successful and make a long-term relationship work. The ones who just slide in and out of these phases and who aren't having open and active conversations about each step that relationship is taking, the communication levels already aren't at a point where they're going to be successful going into the long run.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And it just kind of like, that's kind of what happened. I recorded an episode yesterday about this where you go to college, you meet someone, and then like the next step is you get married and have kids. Like there's no thought. You find the person. Okay. Oh, now it's our turn to do the rest of the stuff, without much thought. So I do like, and I'm about to meet someone new this weekend. So I like the idea of having those kinds of conversation at each phase. So I will definitely take that into consideration.
Yeah, it's so important. I know, again, like when I was dating before being in a relationship, I've done this whole sliding from one phase to the other thing. But actually, the more you talk about what is going on in the process of how you guys are progressing, the more content that relationship is going to be, because you're going to have really clear definitions of what step you're at and what phase you're at. Before moving in with each other, have a conversation about what living with each other is going to be like, what you kind of expect from the other person if you're living in a shared space, rather than just going, oh, the timing is kind of right, like my lease is up and it would be nice to live with them. So maybe, it's just a natural thing that's happened. So I guess I'll just move in with them. No, sit down, have a conversation about it. What are going to be the pros and what could be the cons? Is this actually the right thing for you guys to do right now? Or is it just convenient? Because a lot of relationships happen out of convenience, and they're the ones that actually, when you guys sit down and talk about things, you go, oh, maybe in 10 years this won't work because we haven't actually sat down and had a proper conversation about where we're going.
Yeah, I love that too. Because I know people that have gotten married because they're like the convenience of moving in together. And then they're like, the automatic next step is to get married and they're on the rocks, like you're saying. So is anything resonating with you, Rowan, about the last stuff we're talking about?
It's funny you talk about the explicit conversations, because the person I was most recently talking to, he loved to have those conversations. And in fact, I would get very frustrated and annoyed with them. I think it's because I, of course, did not want to commit. And so by having that conversation, you are addressing exactly where are you at, and where are you going. And because I wasn't sure yet, I did not want to acknowledge that or have those conversations. There were times, that I would tell him, because I hadn't been divorced for really any time when we met. And, neither had he. He was recently separated and getting divorced. And so I don't know if I just wanted to live a single life again. And single for me doesn't necessarily mean going out and dating a whole bunch of people. It's kind of just having my own time and space. So when I say not owing anything to somebody, it means just that. It's like if I want to take this job or, do this internship here or do whatever, it's doing it without another person in mind. And then another issue that you kind of touched on at the beginning about the geographic separation, for instance, for two people who are ambitious, that is something that is very big for me. I refuse to be with somebody who's content with the status quo. Like they're not continuously striving to meet the next best thing, then I find it hard to be attracted to them. Whether that is unhealthy or not is a different conversation. But that is definitely something I struggle with. But with that comes the very real possibility of spending much of your relationship apart. The problem with that is that I am very much what's here is here and what's not here isn't. And so if I'm geographically separated from a person, it sucks because, yeah, like I like to talk to you and whatnot, but I don't get to do things with you. And so I do like the option of being able to continue to date, while I'm in my geographic location. Because what I found when I was married and geographically separated, I was stationed away from my ex-husband. And maybe this may just be like a military thing too, but I found it very difficult to make just even friends. Being a essentially married but single person nobody wants to be friends with you. Like other men do not want to be friends with you because you're married. And a lot of women, I'm an officer as well. So that kind of cuts out who I can even be friends with, especially in a military town. And so a lot of female officers also tend to be married and have kids. So they want to hang out with their families. And so I will admit that a lot of my male friends tend to end up wanting something more. And so when I'm single, it almost feels like they're willing to be my friend with the hope of something flourishing into something else. And I almost kind of always know in the back of my head, but it's almost like I'm holding their friendship hostage, which is, when I actually sit down and think about it, it's like pretty terrible. But people, like men, are more likely to want to be friends if I'm single because they hope that maybe it'll go into something else. And for me, alternatively, I'm thinking maybe if they start off as my friend and maybe they want something at first, but then they will settle into saying like, oh, okay, I just want to be friends with her. And then our friendship can continue just down that path and not into something more. So those are just a few of the many things that I struggle with.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that for sure. And to me, it goes back to the love languages too. I think it's crucial. When you have the same, if yours is quality time and you're long distance, you're not going to get quality time. I mean, I did have someone say yesterday that texting counts as quality time for her, so maybe it works. But do you have any thoughts on it? To me, it kind of goes into as you said, the core values and or love languages that you want. What would you say, Danielle?
Yeah, look, I agree. And to be honest, like you said, if you guys are separated for long periods of time and, you flourish in a relationship where you get to spend time with someone, it's not gonna work. But also, I completely back what you're saying when you said about, men do tend to find it a lot easier to make friends with women who are single. That's true because they feel like they don't have to be worried about boundaries as much. So it's easier to build a relationship with a man when you are single because I suppose there's a lesser risk of a boundary being crossed or broken, which just makes it easier to establish a relationship initially, even if it's just a friendship. So it definitely makes, I suppose, if you're trying to make friends at the same time, that makes it a lot easier. But I also think where you said, it's really important, I think, when you go from one relationship to the next to spend some time by yourself and being selfish, if I'm honest. Like everyone says that we shouldn't be selfish with our time when we're in relationships, but ultimately the one time that you have to be selfish is when we're by ourselves, right? So if you're single, you don't have to hold anyone else accountable for the plans that you make or where you want to move to or what job you want to take. And there's a lot of power and freedom in that. So while a lot of, I think more from my experience, women sit around when we're single going, oh, I really wish I had someone to share all these experiences with. I'm like, yeah, but also make the most of what you're experiencing right now. Because when you are in a relationship, yes, you'll still have these experiences, but they'll be completely different and they're going to be done from a completely different angle. So while you don't have anyone else to report into or tell where you're going or have accountability for, make the most of it. This is your time to remember who you are by yourself. And as soon as you remember who you are by yourself, you're going to be a better version of you when you go into a relationship next time because you're going to have established what you want from your own time as well. So if you've been able to go, okay, well, I've spent some time by myself and I figured out exactly what I want and I know what I like doing and where I actually want someone else to fit in, that's only going to make your relationships and your dating life a lot stronger.
Yeah, to be clear, the kind of person that would actually fit in instead of just picking like all the guys. Like I said, narrow it down. Even if you do have 8 choices, like, or you can automatically rule out like, oh, these 6 would totally not fit. Concentrate on the 2. And then you can stop, like not rather than date them for 6 months, you can find out after 2 weeks. Like, all right, this is not a good fit and move on to the next.
Yeah. So, I was single for a good period and I will say I'm like a serial relationship person. Not that I want to, But like you said, things just end up happening. I end up talking to somebody and you go through those phases, and I somehow always find myself in a relationship despite not necessarily wanting one. But when I was single back around like 2015, 2016, I compare it to me being single after my marriage. And I felt back then I was just going out on dates left and right, left and right. And now I've noticed that I don't know if I think it's a combination of having already experienced that also comes with age. I find myself being very picky about who I'm going to spend my time with, because I'd be much more content sitting at home with my dog watching Real Housewives than I would going on a date or spending any amount of time with a person that I'm not gaining anything out of. I know that sounds very like capitalistic and terrible, but not even that. It could even just be like a good conversation where I'm learning something because this person has something to offer in that realm. I can appreciate that. But if I'm just very much not enjoying my time, if you are the type of person that seems very like maybe self-centered and or for lack of a better word, a douchebag, right? I'm not going to waste my time with you, and I'd rather spend it somewhere else. So I have noticed that my trends of dates I'm definitely more about quality than I am quantity at this point in my life.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we are getting close to the 30-minute mark, and we can go a little over, of course, but I just want to make sure I provide enough time for some final comments. I'll start with you, Danielle, as the love coach. Like, whatever you want to take, either mistakes or do's and don'ts, or just kind of stuff you've seen in your research.
So I think one thing that I will say is that when we're dating, a lot of people will tend to date from convenience, and I'll get people who say, well, I'm not finding a good connection with people, like Rowan just said, I can't be bothered to waste my time, so I'm just not going to do it. A lot of people, though, when we're planning dates, we tend to fit it into a point in our day that's convenient. So people will tend to go and grab a coffee with someone or meet for lunch, and actually you haven't put the right allocation of time into dating. So if you're going to fit someone in the morning for a coffee, and that's going to be a date, and you're going to have a catch up, for me, that you're not in date mindset. You're in pre-work or pre-workout mode. So you've got another thing to go on to next. So you're already a step ahead of that date because you're focusing on what's going to happen next. So in order to date a little bit more successfully, I think you need to allocate a certain time during the week where you go, this is going to be my dating point. So again, for all you single people out there, it's really important to just make a bit of an active effort to say, right, for the next 2 weeks, Friday nights are going to be my date nights. Stop doing the Saturday morning coffees or the Sunday afternoon walks, and actually put in a block of time where you're like, I'm fully in date mode. Especially if, people who have been single for a while, it's really, really hard, I think, sometimes to get into date mode. So do something that's going to psych you up before a date. Whatever you do before you go out with your friends or your family or whoever it is that you get excited to go out with, if it's a trip out with the girls or going for drinks or going for dinner, whatever you do to psych yourself up for that event, do it before a date. There's no rule as to why you shouldn't do that before a date. Put on your favorite set of music, have a really nice bath, get all glammed up, go and do a workout. That gives you a really good boost of serotonin, and that will get you really amped up to go on those dates. Just date from the right mindset, I guess is what I'm saying. So make sure that when you're going out, you're fully present, because a lot of us have really busy lives. We have busy schedules and we're focusing on what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after. So make sure when you're on dates, you're actually there and you're going to actually listen to the person and you're going to be present, not just physically, but also mentally. Because even if you walk away going, do you know what, that might not be a romantic connection, but we had a good laugh. Like they seem like a half decent person and not a douchebag. Then great, because you've got a good story to tell when you do meet the person that you're going to end up with, because you can go, oh yeah, you know what, I've been on a few dates and some of them were great, but they just didn't work. But that's totally okay.
Yeah, and you can still enjoy your time, enjoy your food, enjoy your conversation. And even if you're not interested, to just, like I went out with a guy, granted his picture was way better than what he looked like. And he said most women just give him one word answers and try to get out of there as fast as possible. And I enjoyed the conversation, but yeah, I knew right away I wasn't going to be interested. I wasn't rude about it. And we had a couple of drinks and he paid for dinner, a bonus. So, I mean, I totally agree with that. And then Rowan, do you have any final comments?
I think the biggest takeaway, which I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with me, is that if I am going to date, I need to do it with intention. That's really the first time I've ever heard that, and especially the mindset aspect of it. And so I do appreciate you kind of putting things into perspective and the science to back up that I should be more comfortable and open to having that conversation. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to commit in that conversation. I just have to define what is happening. And if that means that, like this is just for here and for now, or this is because of one reason versus another, that's fine. But there's no problem with explicitly defining what is happening at that time.
DTR, define the relationship. Everyone's got to be happy to DTR.
Yeah. And you can just say like, I want to stay in this phase for a couple more months. Like I'm not ready to move to the next, phase to me. Yeah. So yeah, having the conversation doesn't mean you're going to accept it. It's to have the conversation to Rowan's point and yours. So,
all right. You don't have to actively like progress, but as long as you're having those conversations, like it just shows that the communication between the two of you is strong enough to either move to the next phase or not. And whatever you guys decide, at least that there's clear boundaries and there's clear definition to it. And that makes dating a whole lot easier to understand what's going on in the process.
Yeah, I agree. Any final thing to that, Rowan, or she covered it for you?
No, she definitely covered it. I'm going to take what she's said today and hopefully be better. Who knows? I don't know if this is probably the best idea, but I might go back to the person I was recently talking to. And perhaps if I have like a different mindset, I do think if I had a different mindset in it, it could have had some longevity. Like it could have actually worked. I do think that my failure to commit affected how I behaved in the relationship, and ultimately what kind of caused it to not fare well. So perhaps if I went into it with a different mindset, I would treat it differently and it would have the potential of actually working out.
Yeah, I agree. And Danielle's shaking her head. Go ahead if you have something more to say about that.
Yeah, look, I agree. Sometimes we do a little bit of self-sabotage, maybe because we're not 100% in the right place to be in the relationships that we're in. I've had people before say to me, like, oh God, I think I've missed the chance with the love of my life, but I just wasn't ready for it. And I'll be honest, if that person is meant to be your be-all and end-all person, they're not going to go anywhere. Like, even if you have turned around and you've said, I don't want to be in this relationship right now, they'll still be there. Whether or not they let you go back is obviously a very different question. And you need to, from my point of view, relationships can maybe sometimes have a one-time wobble, what I like to call as a one-time wobble. So you guys can break up and you spend some time apart, you reflect on the behavior that was going on in that relationship, and you can go, right, okay, here's the bits that I can take accountability for, or maybe I wasn't quite in the right place. Then you can go back because you've seen what life is like without that person. You've understood maybe the communication breakdowns that had happened, and you can go back again from a fresh mindset and go, this is what I won't allow to happen the second time round. Any more than one time breaking up, you don't do it anymore. But a one-time wobble, I 100% understand those.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I agree. I've done the breakup over 7 years off and on. Every time we were together, we broke up. So it was a pretty big clue that we should stop. And we finally did. So, all right. I will end here and just say thank you very much, Danielle and Rowan, for being on. I think this is an awesome episode and a lot of people will get something from this. And if you liked the episode or in general this podcast, please subscribe. And also don't forget to check out her podcast, Love Undressed, and also Instagram and TikTok at The Love List. And we can also put these links, and any links you give me, I can add to the description of the podcast as well. So thank you again for being on. I appreciate it. It was a great episode, I think. Thank you
Thank
again.
you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Frank Talk, sex and dating educate.